Hey everybody, Dan Murrell here with my review of Rocketman, the Elton John musical biopic, which hits theaters today here in North America. It got an earlier release in a few overseas markets, including the UK, but it's hitting the theaters here in North America today. And I underline musical in musical biopic because that's what this movie is. It is a Broadway style musical. These aren't just Elton John performances included in the film as part of the dressing of his story. There are full-blown musical numbers. They use Elton John songs to convey different parts of scenes and emotions. It's not just a performance movie. It is a musical biopic. And so many studios underplay that element. I even think that the trailers for this movie underplayed exactly how big of a musical it is. I don't know why they did that, because I think that's one of the things that actually works the most in this movie's favor. The fact that it is very dreamlike at times, the fact that it acknowledges the fact that this is in many ways a fantasy version of Elton John's life. And I think that excuses some things in this movie that another movie that it is so tied to in so many ways, which was last year's Bohemian Rhapsody, got taken to task for. We'll break that down a little bit. The director of this film is Dexter Fletcher. This is the first of many ways that we tied this movie to Bohemian Rhapsody, who was originally lined up to direct that film, but got deep into his version of the film. Ultimately, the studio decided to go a different way. There's been a lot of publicity about the fact that Bohemian Rhapsody explicitly wanted to go for a PG-13 rating. Rocketman is R-rated. It has the edges are a lot sharper on this film than there were in Bohemian Rhapsody. That's not to say that Bohemian Rhapsody did the wrong thing. The movie made almost $1 billion worldwide. Obviously, that was a great move for that movie. But this movie, I think, when you look at what Dexter Fletcher did with the film, and there are a lot of beats that are the same beats. This is the same music industry. This is the same time. This is the same era. You're talking about two performers that both struggled with addiction issues, that both struggled with their sexuality, that both were very flamboyant, had huge outsized personalities. There are a lot of similarities between these two movies. But stylistically, I think that what Dexter Fletcher brought to this story, to Elton John's story, works better than the approach that was done for Bohemian Rhapsody, which for me, it's a movie that I enjoyed, but largely rested entirely on Queen's music and Rami Malek's performance. Another thing these two movies do have in common, though, is a great lead performance. In this film, it's Taron Egerton who plays Elton John, and he is fantastic in this movie, not only as an actor, but as a singer. He did the vocals himself. He does his own singing, and he strikes a great balance between sounding like Elton John, but not having to do a complete mimicry of Elton John. He's a great dancer. He's a great singer. He's a great actor. He's really flexing a lot of different skills in this film than Rami Malek had to do in Bohemian Rhapsody. However, I think that Taron Egerton's performance in this movie is as deserving or more of the accolades that Rami Malek received for his portrayal of Freddie Mercury. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but I think a lot of people who may just know Taron Egerton from the Kingsman movies or Robin Hood or some of the other movies that he has been in previous to this are really going to be shocked by not just the range of his acting, but the amount of different skill sets that he puts to use in this movie. There's also a great supporting cast. Bryce Dallas Howard plays Elton John's mother. Richard Madden plays John Reed, Elton John's manager and lover for many years early in his career. Richard Madden plays John Reed in this movie. Aidan Gillen played John Reed in Bohemian Rhapsody, which means we now have two different Game of Thrones actors playing the same character in two different films. Like I said, there's just tendrils connecting these two films all over the place. And there's a great supporting turn from Jamie Bell, who plays Bernie Taupin, Elton John's longtime lyricist. And I think much like a lot of people, because Elton John was the front man for their music, even though Bernie Taupin was writing these amazing words to their songs. And so Elton often got the lion's share of the credit and attention for their collaboration. I also think that because Taron Egerton is so great in this movie, a lot of people might sleep on Jamie Bell's performance, which is also great. It is a great supporting performance. As a matter of fact, there is really no qualm I have with anybody in the cast. It's a really strong ensemble led by Dexter Fletcher. And the one thing you can tell with Dexter Fletcher in this film is he had a very clear vision about what he wanted to do. Now, the thing that might raise a red flag for a lot of people about this movie is that it is not a third-person biopic about Elton John. Elton John himself is an executive producer on this movie. He was involved with it. His husband, David Furnish, is a producer on this movie. So there's definitely some inside dealing as far as, was the legacy tweaked? Were details tweaked to make Elton look better? There's already been some controversy about John Reed's portrayal in this film. That's every biopic. Yes, the involvement of the subject is something that you definitely should look at when you're determining the factual accuracy of it, but that doesn't change the fact that the movie itself is very compelling, and it doesn't make Elton John look like a perfect person. What works in its favor on that front is that because Dexter Fletcher takes this thing so big and so broad, like I said, it's dreamlike at times. The movie itself blurs the line between reality and fiction. You go from very fantastical sequences of music and dancing to a very real sequence in Elton John's life. And these things are smashed together and blurred together so that the movie itself, I think, earns a little creative license just by the fact that that is the style that the movie's presented in. What's real, what's fiction, what's fantasy, what's reality. That works in this movie's favor, and I think that's something that Bohemian Rhapsody, because it presented itself as a much more straightforward drama, those broad elements stood out more in that film because they seemed like cheats. They seemed like shortcuts because everything else was so by the book that when it would do these big montages or take these huge swings at scenes that seemed like vast oversimplifications of reality, they stood out more. Where in this movie, it is very stage-like. It's supposed to be broad. It's supposed to be fantastical. That's the tone of the movie, and it works for this movie. As I mentioned, there are a lot of beats that are repeated because not just in this movie and Bohemian Rhapsody, but between so many movies about artists, because so many artists struggle with addiction, so many artists struggle with pain, with a difficult family life. You see a lot of those beats come up in this movie. It's Elton John's life. It's very personal, but where the movie actually excels is when it goes deep into these personal stories. Elton John had a very public and long struggle with addiction, and what so many other biopics do is take that struggle and turn it into act 2, and then the third act is all about, you know, the glory and the rise and everything else after the fact. What I liked about Rocketman is that in many ways it is a 2-act movie. It is the rise of Elton John and the fall of Elton John and his struggle with addiction. Now, they don't leave it open-ended, and if you know what his life is like, you know generally what happened. Obviously, he's thankfully still with us. He's still making music. But I liked the fact that Elton's struggle with addiction wasn't sent as an obligatory act 2 conflict that had to be resolved so we could get to the big showy performance in act 3. The last half of this movie is all about why he struggled, what his struggles were, how deep and dark his life was at times. And I think that's where you have the advantage of having him directly involved, because it does feel very personal. It does feel like you are getting a glimpse into what was actually going on inside of his head, inside of his heart during these rough years in his life. And I like the fact that they didn't shrug that off for a big 30 to 45 minute end of the movie where it's all about the comeback. I love that this is about his earlier years. And it's honestly something that, you know, I could see if this movie's a huge hit, if they want to do the Lion King years in 10 years with Taron Egerton, sure, why not? Let's do it. I mean, this movie is really strong as far as performance goes. These are characters that you want to see come back. But the way that they handled it in this movie, I think, yes, it does lean into some of the biopic tropes, but it also arranges them in a way that you might not be familiar with that I think works for the movie. So much has been compared, and I've compared it already to Bohemian Rhapsody. These are 2 different films, and I think the reason that they're compared is the Dexter Fletcher connection, the fact that the subject matter is similar at a similar time. But I really do think when you look at these movies, it is hard to look at movies that share so many similarities and see how one of them executed something in a really unique and interesting way, and how one of them struggled to do so. And like I said, I enjoyed both films. I enjoyed this film better, and I honestly think retroactively, it does show you even more where some of the shortcomings were in Bohemian Rhapsody, and where they might have needed a director that had a stronger vision of what exactly to do with that movie, that embraced how unique its subject was. Rocketman is a movie that feels very much like Elton John. It feels like a product of its subject. Whereas Bohemian Rhapsody felt like a strong Rami Malek performance that was telling the story of Queen, but didn't quite have that factor that made it unique to its subject. That's what Rocketman has, and I think that's what sets it apart. I really, really enjoyed this music. This movie, the music, of course, is great. The songs that Elton John wrote and Bernie Taupin wrote lyrics for are classics and are hits for a reason. It combines the best parts of Bohemian Rhapsody, the best and worst parts of Elton John's life, and a great directorial vision to create a really entertaining whole. I very much recommend Rocketman. If you like Elton John's music, if you like Elton John, I think you're going to love this movie. If you like musicals, I think you're going to really like this movie. And then just in general, I think that cinematically, stylistically, it's very engaging to watch. It draws the audience in. Even if you don't know anything about Elton John, I think it is a great story about love and being loved and what that means and what not being loved can do to a person. The idea that you can have everything in the world and still have nothing. There's some very universal themes in this movie. It does hit some of the tropes. It's not a perfect film. There are a few times that I'm like, okay, I've seen this before. The bad manager, the issues with the parents. But because Dexter Fletcher has such a confident hand on the wheel in this film, it always has a surprise or a really cool way to tell the story right around the corner. So even if you find yourself in those moments where you think you've seen this before, because you have, I think it's going to surprise you at the next turn. So that's a recommendation from me for Rocketman. What did you think of the movie? Are you an Elton John fan? Are you not an Elton John fan? Did that affect how you like the movie? Let me know in the comments section below. And as always, stay tuned here on Fandom Entertainment. We'll have reviews of the latest movies hitting theaters. Till next time, I'm Dan Murrell. Thanks for watching.